In the heart of a crumbling Soviet-era city, an abandoned park lay shrouded in an eerie silence. Once a place of laughter and joy, it had become a haven for shadows and whispers. Mothers with strollers and children on skateboards had long disappeared from its winding paths. Now, only drunken companies and juvenile punks dared to tread its forgotten walkways. The park's decline began on a cold winter's night with the death of an unknown Ural cat. The feline had died of old age in a 5-story building with peeling paint, in a modest one-room apartment with a 5-meter kitchen and a combined bathroom. The cat's owner, a sullen middle-aged man named Yuri, lived a reclusive life. He was one of those people doctors call sociophobes, and neighbors referred to as Biryugi, a hermit. Yuri had adopted the cat years ago, finding solace in its silent companionship. He spoke little and interacted even less with the outside world. The cat's death was a blow to his already fragile spirit. On the night the cat died, Yuri buried it in a shallow grave in the park, beneath an ancient oak tree that had stood sentinel for generations. After the burial, strange things began to happen. At first, it was small disturbances, the rustling of leaves when there was no wind, the feeling of being watched, and the whispers that seemed to emanate from the shadows. People who ventured into the park at night reported seeing fleeting shapes and hearing distant, mournful cries. The park, once a place of life and light, had become a realm of darkness and fear. One evening, a group of teenagers, emboldened by alcohol and bravado, decided to spend the night in the park. They laughed off the rumors of hauntings, daring each other to explore the darkest corners. As they wandered deeper into the park, the air grew colder, and an oppressive silence settled over them. "Come on, it's just a stupid cat," one of the boys scoffed, kicking at the dirt near the oak tree. "Yeah, what's the worst that could happen?" Another chimed in, though his voice betrayed a hint of unease. They set up camp near the oak, lighting a small fire and trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. As the night wore on, their bravado began to wane. The fire cast long, flickering shadows, and the whispers in the dark grew louder, more insistent. "Did you hear that?" one of the girls asked, her voice trembling. "It's just the wind," a boy replied, though he too was straining to listen. Suddenly, the fire flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in as they fumbled for their flashlights. When the lights came on, they revealed something that made their blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the circle of light was a figure, gaunt and hollow-eyed, with a spectral cat at his feet. "Yuri," one of the boys whispered, recognizing the reclusive man. But it wasn't Yuri as they remembered him. This Yuri seemed translucent, his form wavering as if caught between worlds. The cat at his feet stared at them with glowing eyes, its fur bristling. "You should not have disturbed the grave," Yuri's voice echoed, hollow and distant. "Leave this place and never return." Terrified, the teenagers scrambled to their feet and fled, leaving their belongings behind. As they ran, the park seemed to close in around them, the shadows reaching out like grasping hands. They could hear Yuri's mournful wail following them, urging them to leave and never come back. By morning, the park was deserted once more, the echoes of the night's terror lingering in the air. The teenagers never spoke of what they had seen, but the fear in their eyes told the story. Word spread quickly, and the park became a place to avoid at all costs. Weeks passed, and Yuri's apartment remained dark and silent. Concerned neighbors eventually called the authorities, who broke down the door to find the apartment empty, save for a single photograph of Yuri and his cat. The bed was neatly made, and a thin layer of dust covered everything, as if no one had lived there for months. Despite the authorities' best efforts, Yuri was never found. The park, however, remained a place of fear and mystery. Those who dared to enter after dark spoke of seeing a ghostly figure wandering the paths, a spectral cat always by his side. One late autumn evening, a young woman named Natasha, a journalist with a penchant for the paranormal, decided to investigate the park's dark legend. Armed with a camera and a notebook, she ventured into the heart of the abandoned park as the sun dipped below the horizon. The park was eerily silent, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath her feet. As she approached the ancient oak tree, she felt a chill run down her spine. She set up her camera, hoping to capture any evidence of the supernatural. Hours passed, and just as she was about to give up, she saw it, a flicker of movement in the darkness. She trained her camera on the source, her heart pounding. There, beneath the oak tree, stood Yuri and his cat, their forms ethereal and glowing. "Yuri," she whispered, stepping closer. The ghostly figure turned to face her, his hollow eyes filled with sorrow. "You should not be here," he said, his voice a haunting echo. "Why are you haunting this place?" Natasha asked, her voice trembling. Yuri's form seemed to waver, and for a moment, she thought he might vanish. But then he spoke again, his voice filled with a deep, abiding sadness. "I am bound to this place by a grief that cannot be undone. The cat was my only companion, and in my solitude, I found comfort in its presence. When it died, I buried it here, hoping to find peace. But my soul cannot rest." Natasha felt a pang of sympathy for the tormented spirit. "Is there any way to help you find peace?" she asked. Yuri looked at her, his eyes filled with a flicker of hope. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but the path to peace is not an easy one. There are secrets buried here, dark and terrible, that must be brought to light." Before Natasha could ask more, Yuri and the cat began to fade, their forms dissolving into the night. "Wait," she called out, but they were gone, leaving her alone in the darkness. Determined to uncover the truth, Natasha vowed to return. She knew that the answers she sought lay hidden in the shadows of the abandoned park, and she was willing to face whatever terrors awaited her. As she gathered her equipment and prepared to leave, she felt the weight of the park's haunting presence settle over her. She knew that the story was far from over, and that the true horrors of the abandoned park had yet to be revealed. Determined to uncover the truth behind Yuri's haunting, Natasha delved into the park's history. She spent days combing through old city records and talking to longtime residents. She learned that the park had been a vibrant place, full of life, before it fell into decay. But the more she uncovered, the more she realized that the park's decline began long before Yuri and his cat. One evening, Natasha visited the local library, hoping to find more clues. She found herself in the archives, surrounded by dusty files and faded photographs. As she sifted through the documents, a particular photograph caught her eye. It was a black-and-white picture of a group of children playing under the oak tree, their faces full of joy. In the background stood a building that looked familiar, Yuri's apartment building. Natasha flipped the photograph over and saw a date, 1967. She felt a chill run down her spine. This photograph was taken decades before Yuri moved into the building. Intrigued, she continued her search, finding more photographs and articles about the park's past. One article mentioned a tragic accident that occurred in the late 1960s. A young boy had gone missing, and despite extensive searches, he was never found. His disappearance marked the beginning of the park's slow descent into neglect and fear. With this new information, Natasha decided to visit Yuri's old apartment. She hoped that she might find something there that could shed light on the park's dark history. She contacted the building's superintendent and, after some persuasion, was allowed to enter Yuri's apartment once more. The apartment was just as she remembered it, cold, silent, and untouched. Natasha moved through the rooms, searching for anything that might help her. In the small, cluttered bedroom, she found a worn diary hidden beneath the mattress. The pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was shaky, but it was clear that the diary belonged to Yuri. As she read through the entries, Natasha realized that Yuri had been deeply troubled. He wrote about his isolation, his bond with his cat, and the strange occurrences that began after he buried the feline in the park. One entry, dated shortly before his disappearance, stood out. "I dream of the boy beneath the oak tree. He calls to me, his voice filled with sorrow. I feel his presence in the park, a shadow that cannot move on. The cat senses it too. There is something buried here, something that binds us all. I must uncover the truth, for only then will we find peace." Natasha's heart raced as she read the entry. Yuri had been haunted not just by his own loneliness but by the spirit of the missing boy. She knew she had to go back to the park, to the oak tree, and dig deeper, literally and figuratively. That night, armed with a shovel and a flashlight, Natasha returned to the park. The air was thick with anticipation, and the whispers seemed to follow her every step. As she approached the oak tree, she felt a presence beside her, a cold hand guiding her movements. With trembling hands, Natasha began to dig. The earth was hard and unyielding, but she kept at it, driven by a force she could not explain. As she dug deeper, her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows around her. She unearthed old roots and rocks, but she didn't stop. Hours passed, and just when she thought she could go no further, Her shovel struck something hard. Natasha's heart pounded in her chest as she cleared the dirt away, revealing a small, rusted tin box. She carefully pried it open, revealing its contents: a child's shoe, a toy car, and a faded photograph of a boy standing under the oak tree. Tears filled Natasha's eyes as she realized she had found a connection to the missing boy. She knew that this box held the key to the park's haunting. As she held the photograph, she felt a cold breeze pass over her, and she heard a voice, soft and mournful, whisper in her ear, "Thank you." Natasha looked around, but there was no one there. She knew that the boy's spirit was close, and that she had taken the first step in unraveling the mystery. She carefully rebared the box, knowing that she had to find out more about the boy and what had happened to him. As she left the park, Natasha felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. The spirits of the park were counting on her, and she was determined to bring them the peace they so desperately sought. But she also knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. The park held many secrets, and some of them were darker than she could imagine. She had barely scratched the surface, and the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it would become. Natasha vowed to return, to continue her investigation and to confront whatever malevolent force was keeping the spirits bound to the park. She was not afraid, for she knew that she was not alone. The spirits of Yuri, his cat, and the missing boy were with her, guiding her every step of the way. And as she walked away from the park, the whispers in the darkness seemed to grow louder, calling her back, urging her to uncover the secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface. The mystery was far from over, and Natasha was ready to face whatever came next. Determined to uncover the full truth behind the haunting, Natasha threw herself into her investigation with even greater fervor. She spent days talking to former residents, scouring archives, and piecing together the fragmented history of the park and its surroundings. One name kept surfacing: Mikhail Petrov. He had been the last person to see the missing boy, Alexei, alive. Mikhail was an old man now, living in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of the city. Natasha decided to visit him, hoping he could provide the final piece of the puzzle. Mikhail was initially reluctant to talk, but Natasha's persistence paid off. Over a cup of bitter tea, he finally opened up. "It was a long time ago," Mikhail began, his voice trembling. "Alexei was a sweet boy. We used to play in that park every day. But then, one evening, he vanished. No one could find him. The police searched for weeks, but there was no trace." Tears welled in Mikhail's eyes as he continued. "I always felt guilty. I was supposed to watch him that day. I heard him scream, but by the time I got there, he was gone. I saw a man running away, but no one believed me. They said it was an accident, that Alexei just wandered off and got lost." Natasha's heart sank. She could see the weight of Mikhail's guilt and sorrow. "Do you remember anything else? Anything unusual about that day?" Mikhail hesitated, then nodded. "There was something strange about that man. He had a dark aura, like he wasn't entirely human. And after Alexei disappeared, the park changed. It was like a curse had settled over it." With this new information, Natasha felt a growing sense of dread. She knew she had to confront whatever malevolent force was behind Alexei's disappearance and the park's haunting. She gathered her equipment and returned to the park one final time, determined to put an end to the curse. As night fell, the park was shrouded in a thick fog. The whispers were louder than ever, and Natasha felt an oppressive presence closing in around her. She made her way to the oak tree, where she had buried the tin box. This time, she brought a spirit board, hoping to communicate directly with the spirits. She set up the board and placed her hands on the planchette. "Alexei, are you here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out, "Yes." "Who took you, Alexei?" Natasha asked, her heart pounding. The planchette spelled out a name that made Natasha's blood run cold. Demon. Natasha's mind raced. A demon? She had never believed in such things, but the evidence was undeniable. She knew she had to act quickly. She pulled out a book of ancient rituals she had found in her research and began to recite a banishing spell, hoping to rid the park of the malevolent entity. As she chanted, the air grew colder, and the whispers turned into anguished screams. Shadows writhed and twisted around her, and she felt a dark force pressing against her, trying to stop her. She pushed through the fear, continuing the chant with all her strength. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the ghost of Yuri, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Natasha, you must leave," he urged. "The demon is too strong." But Natasha was determined. "I can't leave you all here, trapped. I have to try." Yuri's form flickered, and the spectral cat at his feet hissed, its fur bristling. "The demon feeds on our fear and pain. It will not let us go." Just then, a dark, towering figure materialized before Natasha. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent fire, and its presence was suffocating. "You dare to challenge me?" it hissed, its voice a guttural snarl. Natasha stood her ground, holding up the book. "You will leave this place and never return." The demon laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the park. "Foolish girl, you have no power here." With a wave of its hand, the demon sent Natasha sprawling to the ground. Pain shot through her body, but she struggled to her feet, refusing to give up. She resumed the chant, her voice growing stronger with each word. The demon roared, and the ground beneath Natasha's feet began to shake. Trees groaned and bent, and the air crackled with dark energy. Natasha felt herself being pulled into a vortex of shadows, the demon's power overwhelming her. In her final moments, Natasha thought of Alexei, Yuri, and all the spirits trapped in the park. She poured every ounce of her will into the spell, hoping to break the demon's hold, even if it cost her everything. A blinding light erupted from the book, and the demon screamed in rage and pain. The light engulfed Natasha, the oak tree, and the surrounding area. For a moment, it seemed as though the curse might be lifted. But as the light faded, the park was left in silence. Natasha was gone, her sacrifice in vain. The demon's presence remained, its laughter echoing through the empty pathways. The park, once a place of joy and life, remained a haunted wasteland. Those who ventured near could still hear the whispers, and the shadows grew darker with each passing day. The spirits of Yuri, his cat, and the missing boy Alexei were bound even tighter, their hopes of peace extinguished. Natasha's bravery was not forgotten, but her story became a cautionary tale. The park's curse was stronger than any one person could overcome, a dark testament to the malevolent forces that lurked within. And so, the abandoned park stood as a silent reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded, a place where the living and the dead were forever entwined in a sorrowful dance, haunted by a darkness that would never be vanquished.